Good morning, everyone. In this talk, we will go through the history and the statistics of ECMO. It is really inspiring to know about this great science which we are trying to learn has developed over the period of years, decades rather, when apart from the concepts, nothing else was there. The objectives of this time of this talk are about knowing about what is ECMO, history of the technology needed for ECMO, and the history of clinical trials of ECMO, a little bit about the statistics, and summing up with where we are today. ECMO, as you all know, is a technique of extracorporeal life support using modified heart-lung bypass techniques for days to weeks to support the heart or lung function in the intensive care unit. So let us go back the time machine to see what has been happening over the past few decades. The concept of ECMO has developed over a period of time. People were really stuck with the damaged lung. Ventilation has been causing to the lungs, resulting in the fibrosis, as well as a temporary resort as well in case of pulmonary embolism, for example, to make sure something will be of help. Two of these things have become very important for us, crucial in the management of ECMO. They are blood for the transfusion and to keep the blood running, as it is the main source of gas exchange, and the clotting related to the blood again. Once the blood clots, then there is no way we can do ECMO. So the blood shouldn't clot when we're intending to do ECMO, and the equipment needed to allow this one. So as the concepts developed over a period of 4 decades, further innovations came too. In 1628, as you know, William Harvey, he discovered the circulation of the blood. Before that, people were not knowing how blood is going between what chambers, etc., etc. In 1665, physician Richard Lower, he kept dogs alive by transfusion of blood from the other dogs. In 1818, James Blundell, he performed the first successful blood transfusion of human blood to treat postpartum hemorrhage. And then in 1900s, uh, Carl Landsteiner, he discovered for the first time about 3 human blood groups A, B, and O. So from there onwards, the next significant impact came in 1916 when J. McLean, a second-year medical student, discovered heparin at John Hopkins Medical Center. It's very interesting to go through the life history of J, how hard he studied and discovered heparin when he was still a student. In 1932, Dr. John Gibbon was a surgical fellow at Pennsylvania Hospital, Philadelphia. He began investigating the use of extracorporeal blood oxygenation as one of the patients he was looking after in his previous posting as when he was a fellow research fellow. The patient passed away following pulmonary embolectomy for pulmonary embolism. So he was looking for developing a mission which will take over the role of the lungs for the duration. The lungs heal in problems like this. So with his initial efforts, he made 3 out of 39 cats survived for 1 year following 2 hours of bypass. This is not immediately, this is following 3 decades of his research. So they started their efforts in the 1930s, and in there was an AST repair in 1953, ending 23 years of apparatus designs and experimentation by John Gibbon and his wife Mary Gibbon, who was his assistant earlier on. This is a photo of Gibbon along with his patient Cecilia posing before the plexiglass covered lung 10 years after the landmark operation. This was in 1963. As Dr. Gibbon started operating using his heart-lung bypass machine, after that he encountered two children subsequently passed away after the first successful case. So he abandoned further use of his heart-lung machine. The Mayo Clinic asked his plans for the Gibbons oxygenator, which he shared with them in 1953. Together, they developed a Mayo Gibbon type of oxygenator by making minimal changes to this Gibbons mode of oxygenator. The mortality rate for intracardiac surgery dropped from 50% in 1955 to 20% in 1956 and to 10% in 1957. See how drastically survival rates have improved. So, simultaneously, many people were trying to help in different platforms. Dr. Lilihi performed cardiac surgery via cross circulation using a bubble oxygenator he invented along with Richard D. Wall in 1954. Simultaneously, at some other part, people were also oxygenating on membrane oxygenators, especially Dr. Colombo and his group. Here we see Dr. Colombo in 1968. He was originally an immigrant from Russia during World War II. With his exceptional talents, he became a medical doctor and further on continued research on developing ECMO, especially known as the inventor of membrane oxygenator. The first bubble oxygenators had the problems of thrombocytopenia, coagulopathy, hemolysis, edema, and organ failure. They were attributed to blood gas interface as they got better. With a silicon membrane oxygenator, there was no air gas interface with this. It was able to provide support to the patients for weeks to months, but it was limited by the diffusion of oxygen through the blood. Then came semi-porous hollow fiber oxygenators, and the gas flow was through the fibers here. It is much more efficient, but there was this additional side effect of plasma leak across the fibers at times. So non-porous oxygenators, they were helpful as they were able to provide long-term ECMO support, less platelet aggregation and minimal hemolysis during that time. The first adult patient was based on ECMO was by Dr. Donald Hill in 1972. He placed this patient who was involved in road traffic accident for 75 hours on extracorporeal support. And this is the patient of Dr. Donald Hill at Santa Barbara. You can see how big was the machinery at that time compared to the size of the patient. He survived though. Bob Bartlett, whom we consider as father of ECMO today, in 1975, Bob placed a patient on meconium aspiration syndrome on ECMO. This is a little baby. We'll see in the next few slides. And just even before that, also Bob placed a 2-year-old boy following mustard procedure for TGA in 1972 on ECMO. So this is a little baby girl whom Dr. Bartlett placed on ECMO when ventilation failed as a result of meconium aspiration syndrome and persistent fetal circulation. in the form of a PDA as well as an added problem. She was a success. The staff on the unit named her as Esperanza, which in Spanish means hope, and she remained as hope for the ECMO community. And this is Esperanza later on. Whenever we go to US, especially to Ann Arbor, we happen to see Esperanza over there as she is a special invitee. She used to come and meet us. I'm fortunate to have Dr. Richard Formin in my team when I was at Glenfield Hospital. Richard was my mentor. He was, I consider him as the father of ECMO in Europe. Then came the design of ECMO cannulae by Schwiesberger. He designed the WMN cannulae, which have been very, very useful in successfully conducting ECMO in all age groups. And there are further improvements upon this as time goes by. And this is a circuit diagram of roller pump ECMO. This we used to do till 2005, and this roller pump ECMO as you are seeing here. Tubing has to go inside and come out by temporarily stopping the ECMO for the least period possible. This we used to call as a walking of the raceway. And here are the, to your right side, these are the latest oxygenators, Helite membrane oxygenators, able to provide better oxygenation to the patient for prolonged periods of time. Here is one patient. Can you see the baby there on ECMO? This is a picture was from 2000 while I was at University Hospital of Leicester. You can see venous ECMO on this baby. And this is the first picture of starting extracorporeal life support in 1989 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. People who were interested in ECMO got together at one place, had deliberations, and from there it spread to the rest of the world, mostly to US and Europe. One picture by showing two different cannulas. Here is a neck cannula draining venous blood and oxygenated blood going through the femoral cannula, as you can see here in an adult. And these are the X-rays, how they look like when there is internal jugular cannula and a femoral cannula here. ECMO can be done in all the three groups of neonatal, pediatric, and adult groups. You can support either the lungs or the heart. So if you're supporting only the lungs, that is veno-venous ECMO. And if you need cardiac support as well, that becomes veno-arterial ECMO. How does ECMO work? People started understanding more and more as time went by. In adults, NIH study was initiated in mid-70s as a national multicentric trial. It wasn't a huge success. 90% of the patients died in both the limbs. The problems with the NIH trial was that it was a beginning of understanding of ECMO. Some centers had no prior experience of ECMO before these trial patients, and best and worst patients were included as well. That was the time of Spanish influenza epidemic time, and excessive bleeding of more than 2 liters per day was observed in them, and lung rest was not used at all. So from then onwards, people realized that we shouldn't ideally put patients with more than 7 days of high pressure ventilation and high FiO2 ventilation on ECMO as far as possible, as lung damage probably has taken place by the time already. The two groups of researchers maintained interest after NIH trial because at this time, as I mentioned, 90% of the patients died in both the groups, conventional as well as in the ECMO group. The fundamental idea is correct, but it needs better case selection and application. Bob Bartlett, he believed neonates had better suitable pathology and greater healing power than the adults. So he continued with the neonatal ECMO, then it became pediatric ECMO. There were few successive trials which were conducted in 1979. First neonatal ECMO conference was held in 1980. Bob Bartlett, he shown how ECMO practice was growing to few cases per month in USA. Then in 1986 onwards, modified design trial was done in USA, and 1989, birth of ELSO in Ann Arbor, Michigan, as we saw the photograph earlier on. So Bob's team maintained interest, and with doing more and more cases, when once they failed the maximal conventional ventilation, they were being placed on ECMO. Then came UK collaborative neonatal ECMO trial, where Richard Foreman and team were involved. In 1992, Heartling ECMO Center in Leicester exhausted the charitable funding. Then it was taken as a national program by representing it in the UK Parliament. Then the collaborative trial for neonatal ECMO was held between 1992 to 1995. The cases were the common ones: meconium aspiration, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, isolated BPH, sepsis, and idiopathic pulmonary respiratory distress in 9% and others in 3% of the cases. So cases were done at 5 centers in UK. 93 were placed on ECMO and 92 on conventional care. ECMO cases showed significant improvement compared to the conventional cases. As you can see, 66 babies who were placed on ECMO were discharged to home, whereas only 38 of those on conventional ventilation survived. But still, outcome in the adults was not available at this point of time. When a trial was done, nearly 28% or 30% of the conventional patients survived, whereas 68% of the ECMO patients survived. Glenfield was still doing the ECMO and adults as well. ECMO with the lung rest is a rational treatment, but a majority of the other centers were not taking up adult ECMOs. In 2005, there was a change in the way we practiced ECMO by introducing centrifugal pumps in the place of the roller pumps. PMP oxygenators, polymembrane pentane oxygenators, they became a routine. Proning, physio, and other innovations for biocompatible equipment became more and more common. CSER trial was started at the time. 180 patients, these were the adult patients, were enrolled randomly into ECMO versus conventional ventilation. 68 of them were actually received ECMO, and 63% of patients allocated to consideration for treatment by ECMO survived for 6 months without disability, compared to only 47% of those allocated to conventional management. So ECMO proved its superiority in this trial. Further interventions were done in a US group later on with the practices by ambulatory lung assist and including physiotherapy as part of the routine for ECMO patients. EOLIA trial was done by Dr. Alan Coombs group in 2018 to address some of the problems left over by CZ trial. The strengths of this trial are mainly the important and relevant research questions about the effectiveness of ECMO in severe RDS, largest multi-center ECMO RCT to date. Standardized criteria were used. Almost all the patients who were randomized to ECMO, they received it. There was crossover though. Protocolized delivery of ECMO and mechanical ventilation resulted in standardized treatment in both intervention as well as control groups. So in this group, there wasn't much superiority of the ECMO limb, probably as a result of the crossover. This trial was stopped early at 249 out of 331 patients. 75% of the recruitment was done by that time. It provides inconclusive support for the benefit of ECMO in severe RDS. Early initiation of ECMO did not improve 60-day mortality compared to the standard care in patients. However, the data also suggested a possible clinical benefit from ECMO over standard care, especially if used early rather than late. In standard therapy, including proning and neuromuscular blockade, it had a higher rate of failure requiring rescue with ECMO. So today, there are many countries in the world besides Europe and USA and doing ECMO. You can see the picture over here. And the world statistics also show nearly more than 150,000 cases of ECMO were done in all the age groups with cumulative survival rates of around 54%. Survival rates are much better in the neonatal group compared to children or adults. It's almost similar data in children as well as adults, as you can see from here. The number of centers have been increasing year by year, and patient counts have also been increasing over the years. There are more of technological improvements since 2005. Circuits are easily primable within 10 minutes now, and cannula implantation through Seldinger method is possible, and pump is also easy to use. This revolution is called as ECMO 2 by Dr. Ramba Bartlett and team. New low resistant lungs can be used with low pressure, safe pumps which are less thrombogenic, inherently safe, self-regulating. Circuit needs only a flow switch, safe and easy vascular access. These are the most important aspects of the ECMO today. So this is the success story of ECMO over the period of years. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer. Thank you very much.